of news making headlines, and just as I had promised a little bit earlier on during the second hour of the broadcast, we'll get to reflect on Ruto's plan as he had articulated during yesterday's roundtable interview with various journalists. And it was proper to know that he talked about an array of issues touching on the economy, the cost of living, his housing plan, the dollar rate in the country, the fight against corruption. So much to cover, so little time. Allow me to introduce my panelists joining me in studio to help us make sense of what the president said yesterday. I'm joined by Diana Gishengo, who's the National Coordinator at the Institute of Social Accountability. Karibu sana. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for making time. Equally joined by Professor Exen Iraki, an economist. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Exen. Karibu sana to the broadcast.
Thank you for this Late Night Express.
Yeah. And I see you sticking to the theme. Your tie is telling about the the season we're in right now.
Christmas is just next week.
Yes.
I'm just doing a rehearsal.
I tell
clearly,
you. He's well prepared.
You have Christmas, yeah. You're among the lucky ones.
No.
There's no Christmas.
I can tell you, I'm just creating an impression.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're usually good at that.
It's a thought that counts. Anyway, gentlemen and lady, thank you so much for your time. As I mentioned, we just want to evaluate what the president said, what it means to the Kenyan population, and as a matter of fact, is that the reality on the ground? So as I mentioned, he talked about many things. I'd like us to start with an excerpt of his interview on what he had to say about the country's debt distress, because he said he's had to make a couple of painful decisions for the better of the country. Listen in.
Our economy today is out of debt distress. And that is the truth. For your information, if I didn't step in, let me even say, if I wasn't president, the kind of decisions I have made, very difficult decisions, very painful decisions, decisions that I know they will cause pain, but it is better we make those decisions now than get Kenya into debt distress. There are almost 8 countries in our continent, including one that went into debt distress. I don't want to mention countries, you know them, last almost 3 weeks or 1 month. That is the worst thing that can happen to any country, to go into debt distress. We are now out of debt distress. Our economy is stable, but the difficult patch is still there. We still have to navigate. All we have done is to avoid the cliff, right? That we have avoided because we have negotiated, we have put brakes on expenditure. We have negotiated a good package with the World Bank, with IMF, with development partners, with bilateral countries, China, Europe, and everywhere. And that's why I have been on the road so many times. People ask, what is he doing? It was necessary for me to step in and stabilize so that Kenya does not go into debt.
Just an excerpt of what he had to say on debt distress and how the country is managing with that. So we've avoided the cliff. Professor, I'd like to begin with you on this because, it's touching on the economy. So just borrowing from what the president had to say, out of every 10 shillings collected, 7 goes towards debt repayment. And according to the control of budget, as she mentioned, Kenya crossed the 10 trillion mark in June 2023. Right now, we are using a debt ceiling that is anchored at 55% of GDP in present value terms. So in terms of debt management, from where you sit, are we managing it in the right manner? And how much wiggle room do we actually have?
Let me start by stating that I listened to the president's speech. And one thing I have no doubt about is that the president is in tune with the national mood. He seems to know exactly what Kenyans are thinking, what Kenyans are worried about, and what Kenyans are concerned about. And the questions he responded to, he tried to do that. So when you come to the issue of debt, it's interesting, somewhere in his speech, he said, I want money to pay the teachers. I don't remember him saying, I want money to pay debt. But there's no question about it that Kenya has a big debt and needs to start paying it. If you remember a few months ago, the government said we are going to pay a part of Eurobond this month. And the market cheered. So if the government can pay part of that Eurobond debt this month, then that would be a very good evidence to show that we are getting out of the debt hole. So I think he painted a very optimistic view of how we are managing debt. But as we say, the test of pudding is eating. So once we see that we pay the Eurobond, part of Eurobond this year, and then that will be a very good indicator that what he said is true, that we are managing debt.
Okay.
But so far, we have avoided the debt distress, or we have avoided defaulting on debt, like the countries he doesn't want to mention, and I also not going to mention.
Well, countries like Ethiopia.
Because I agree with him that defaulting would be an economic disaster.
Okay, so that's a route we cannot afford.
And
to
if
take.
we can make sure we don't do that,
okay,
I think that would be a plus for him.
All right. So Dan, as you come in, because your matters centered around accountability. So what would you say is the accountability level around the debt management in the country? Because we've heard of talk even before the president's interview of talk of publishing the debt register, so we actually know who we own, how much we own, and what we should do about it. So in terms of accountability, what's your evaluation of it?
I would say we have made strides in terms of debt accountability. And first, for the president to have acknowledged and taken time to educate Kenyans that out of 10 shillings, 7 is going to debt. And you would ask, if 7 shillings out of every 10 collected is going to debt, are we out of debt distress? I don't think so. I would say he has avoided, but he hasn't voided. And he actually states that we've been able to avoid the grief right now. So we were on ICU, life dependency, life-saving machine. So we are being prepared. Look, let me continue managing this, kicking the can down the road. At some point, we will have to default. But what I think we have ultimately avoided is a default of our foreign debt. If we are not paying pensioners, we're already in default. Pensioners contributed their money 30 years ago. We kept it. We invested it. Now we cannot pay them. But they're not in the league of bilaterals, multilaterals, or things like that. We are focusing on paying Eurobond for our image out there. Our image inwardly, what happens to our pensioners, salaries for teachers, what happens to our education system, health can go private and all of you can pay, especially anyone with a pay slip must pay. So that is what has happened. But I think that's the conversation we need to open up. What does it mean in terms of accountability for 7 shillings to go to debt? How did we get here? So the question of the debt audit, particularly the last 10 years, and we must state very clearly, this is not a Ruto government problem. It is a problem that was there, particularly since the Uhuru period of 2013. The debt accumulation, the debt accountability was questioned severally. Remember, even as we gear ourselves and ready ourselves to redeem our international image and pay the Eurobond, there are still questions that remain unanswered. Questions that were asked by the CBK governor then, when it was not clear whether this money hit the consolidated fund. This is a huge amount. And the balance sheet at the central bank is very clear. So for it to have been questioned, and you know, just a small delay, over $1 billion US, whether it was at that particular rate of 70-something or at the current rate of 150, you just delay it by a bit, the interest whoever is holding our money earns is a lot. Yet this delay was far much longer. We have seen the controller of budget raising questions around how debt is utilized and indicating that most of our bonds are not assigned to a specific development project. And currently, as we manage the debt, we are borrowing debt to repay debt. We are borrowing debt to pay salaries. Yet debt is supposed to go straight to a vote head for development. So we are still far from getting those strides. And you see, offices like the Controller of Budget, Office of the Auditor General, these are supposed to service Parliament. But they seem to be servicing Treasury and some other people. Parliament is still waiting. They wrote to Treasury, help us cut $500 million. Who is the ultimate person who holds our budget? It's Parliament. They have the Parliamentary Budget Office. They ought to cut it. And if they have other ideas, come back to us, the representatives. So in terms of accountability, we are very far from getting to where we ought to be. And it's something that needs a lot of awakening, because how many scandals have we had that were related to debt? Right now, we still question SGR and the Eurobond. But remember Anglo-leasing. And Prof here would be a better teacher than me on what exactly that we have structured and laid a framework for debt that makes it so easy. Debt is the easiest thing to steal. Which is unusual. Why do we have different standards for how we treat debt in the public sphere, yet when you take your own personal debt, it actually shocks you to get a certain discipline. In the public sphere, it actually the reverse. Yeah, so we are still far from getting there.
That's interesting. Prof, briefly.
Maybe something I would like to add two things. If 7 out of 10 shillings that you collect is used to pay debt, then you are stifling development, which is what we should be doing. We should be making the economy grow so that we create more jobs. The economy expands, and we have these young men and women getting jobs. But more important, and I think I like the way she alluded to that, is that we are only focusing on the foreign debt. One of the biggest problems that is holding this economy hostage is actually internal debt. Every governor has some debts he is trying to probe. Even the Treasury has some debts they are trying to probe. There is even a committee trying to look at those debts. And you know, if you look at the economy moves when money moves. So when so much money is held by the government and it's not going to the people, then the economy does not grow. But the government and most of us have succeeded in diverting us from the local debt to international debt. I even wonder if you look at the debt statistics, and I like the way she is putting it, we need a debt register. When you talk about the 11 trillion, does it include the local debt owned by contractors? Or even debt that me and you borrow but we refuse to pay? And finally, she says that debt is the easiest thing to get. And I'm concerned because when a government decides that instead of using other sources of revenue, the best one is debt, then we have a problem. Because debt is very easy to get. You just fill some papers and then you get a debt. But you see, if you try to raise the revenues, if you try to expand the economy so that more people pay taxes and so on, it's not as easy. So sometimes I feel that going for debt is an easy option. And sometimes there is an option. So let's look at other sources of revenue, not just debt.
Interesting. Even as we talk about debt distress, I'd like us to shift focus to what the president said about the cost of living. Gharama ya maisha imepanda. Of course, it's a cause of concern for many households, but this is what the president had to say in terms of the steps they're taking to bring it down. Listen in. We just want to take a look at what the president said on the cost of living, gharama ya maisha. If we could have that clip.
Gharama ya maisha inachangiwa na vitu vitatu. Ya kwanza ni gharama ya chakula. Right? Na nikisema uchumi iko na uchumi ya tumbo. Nataka nikuulize na Wakenya wenzangu, tumefanya lolote kupunguza gharama ya chakula? Yes, we have done major steps. The price of food items is today lower than it was a year ago. It is a fact. Lakini, of course, it's not convenient for certain people to accept. That's number one. Number two, globally, where is Kenya? Uchumi wa numbers And these are not my figures. We've brought down inflation from 9 point something to now 6.8. Those are figures, global figures of the World Bank. Number two, our economy is growing at 5.4%. Not my figures, World Bank figures, right? In fact, they quote Kenya is the 29th fastest growing economy globally. Those are figures out there. Of course, many people don't want to accept. I know that there is still no money in people's pockets. Uchumi wa mfuko
bado
ndio bado. Yeah?
Utakuwa lini?
Are we doing something about it? Yes. That is why we're spending more money in education. Yeah? We're putting more money in education. In fact, this year, we are putting an extra 120 billion in education. To do what? To make sure that we reduce outlay by Kenyans to fund education. Number two, we are putting more money in health. That is why we've passed 4 laws. What do we want to do? We want to make sure every ordinary citizen has a health insurance. Those who are paying 500 will come down to 300. We are going to make sure that we don't leave nobody behind. That is why I am going out of my way to...
Okay, so there you have it, the president just mentioning some of the initiatives they've taken up to bring down the cost of living, uchumi wa tumbo. Number one, he's mentioned that the cost of living where Kenya is compared to its peers, and a couple of other things. So what's your major takeaway from the issue of cost of living? Because the general question would be, have we done enough to ensure that Kenyans don't feel the pinch necessarily when it comes to the cost of living? And equally, where do we find the balance between, revenues and providing relief? Collecting revenues and providing relief. Diana, let's start with you.
It is interesting to hear the president come round, and I think he wore black. Allow me first to go back to his dress. He wore black deliberately to prepare us for grief.
You're wearing black as well?
Yes, you see, because I'm very Kenyan and I have accepted that it will be painful for a long time.
Okay.
And this points to a shift where he's acknowledging that we must do something to ensure that people are not dying of hunger every day. The previous posture was that government would subsidize production and not consumption.
Yes.
But I think a new reality has dawned on government, and now they are starting to do something about consumption. Food, I think they're even mulling over, instead of giving a subsidy around fertilizer, a cash transfer so that there's money in their economy. But he started saying that there are 3 things that are affecting the cost of living. I got lost in the 3 things, but I do know there are 3 things that are making us not get to where we would want to be. First is that confusion and failure to recognize for the different levels of cost of living. Consumption and production, both of them must be given equal attention.
Okay.
When it comes to thinking about, we cannot just think about the future, producing food for the future, factories for the future. For now, we must be alive to service those particular industries.
Okay.
And I think the government, so one of the major things is, again, lack of accountability. You introduce subsidies, you even go and import edible oil, then it does not get to the country. You've taken taxpayers' money in this very constricted fiscal space, then you flee and steal again. You create a bigger hole. So one is the continued lack of accountability and theft, without seeing any form of accountability. And then secondly is the fiscal policies that were introduced, particularly in the last year, that are around, I don't know the exact terminology for it in the world of economics, but it is every service, we pay for it. We tax people, we pay for education, we pay for health, we'll try privatize water, everything, we are paying more when the cost of living is extremely high.
Okay.
So that particular model just causes people to be more poor. Companies realize that whatever they are giving their employees is no longer enough. Their cost of doing business is higher for companies that are in production. What do? They leave the country. So we've seen more people being laid off.
Okay.
You increase taxation and create very many levies all at once. You shock the economy, you shock the stomach, you shock the individual. There's no balance.
Okay.
Again, the cost of living and poverty just increases. There's definitely global issues, but energy, the cost of energy in this country, and the 16% VAT on petroleum will keep increasing this. So those are some of the consideration. I think energy is the closest we come to the global inflation.
Yes.
And then finally, and this is more Professor Iraki, is the confusion around what the central bank does. Are they around for price stability? Are they supposed to be managing inflation? Are they under control of anyone? My reading of law and so on, the CBK governor must be very independent if they are to steer us out of this particular crisis.
Okay, and Prof, as you come in and even respond to the role of CBK in all this, because we've heard of the statistics, not his as he mentioned, but from World Bank, 5.6% in terms of GDP growth. So if you look at those numbers, 29th fastest growing economy, I think. So when you look at those numbers, it definitely paints a good picture that the economy's avoided that pit, as he mentioned. But when you talk to the people on the ground, that dwindling or the shrinking disposable income is definitely being felt by the common wananchi. So how do we strike a balance at the end of the day between giving a reprieve and perhaps maximizing on our collections? Yeah.
I think the question is, are you looking at the forest or are you looking at the trees? If you look at the forest, it looks very beautiful, carpets, but if you go inside the forest, you find some trees have fallen, some trees have stunted, others are burning charcoal and so on.
Yeah.
So I think we also need to look at the trees, not just the forests.
Okay.
I think when you look at the statistics, very good news. But you look at the details, the people on the streets, Wanjiko on the streets, they'll tell you a very different story. They'll tell you there's no money. And I wish he had finished the story as she puts it about the costs of living. One of them is food. There's no doubt that when it rains, the cost of living goes down because you eat, and the supply of food goes up and the price goes down.
Yeah.
But he also should have talked about oil, because oil is a very big factor. Two factors drive inflation in this country: oil and food. And the price of oil has been going up and up. And luckily now the international market, the price is going down. So we are seeing some relief. Yeah. Although what is happening in the Red Sea might negate that because of the chaos around the Red Sea is interrupting the supply lines. But I think the ultimate way to make sure that at the end of the day everybody benefits from this growth is to make sure there's more equity.
Okay.
There's more equality, so that everybody benefits. Like the rising tide, we should lift our boats. And some of the areas that we need to focus on, and she mentioned, is the incentives. Because at the end of the day, if we want to deal with the cost of living, we should have money in our pockets. And we get money in our pockets if there are jobs being created. But are we giving manufacturers incentives? Are we giving entrepreneurs incentives? So if you talk to everybody in the street, they will tell you the taxes are going up. But taxes should not just be seen as getting money for the government. They should also be used as incentives to make people invest. And I'll give you a good example I had 2 days ago. I went to buy a car battery. And I was given a range of batteries from 5,000 to about 15,000. And one of the questions I asked the sellers is, where is this battery from? 2 are from Egypt. Okay. One was from a place called Czech Republic. And I was wondering, why are we not manufacturing batteries? And if you go to other industries, you find the same. A lot of people are coming to sell things here instead of manufacturing them. Okay. So when that happens, then you lose jobs. And when people are jobless, even a small adjustment in tax or in prices has a very big effect. But if we had jobs, if we had money in our pockets, we would probably be riding this cost of living much more easily because we have savings. The salary would adjust. But as long as there are no jobs, any other initiative we take or we try to put into place to manage the cost of living will be a problem.
Okay.
And then finally, central bank. I think worldwide, central banks should be very independent. And that was the purpose, so that they can control the inflation, they can control the monetary policy, like what they did recently. There is the interest rates. The interest rates are going to make the sharing stronger, but at the same time, they are going to make it harder for us to borrow money. And what is going to happen? Less jobs will be created. So there's always that trade-off.
Okay.
And that is, it is because of those trade-offs that the central bank should be dependent, not directed by anybody else.
Interesting point. I hope our question is answered right there. Let's talk about something else, because he definitely talked about the VAT and the approach the government is using in terms of the reasons for VAT increase. Remember, this was a hot topic, if I may call it that way, especially even with the NADCO committee. They weren't able to decide about the VAT on petroleum products. This is what the president had to say.
Tunaongeza bei ya VAT kwa sababu gani? Kenya tuko katika kiwango inaitwa middle income economy. We are in the same category as South Africa. We are in the same category as Morocco. We are in the same category as Tunisia. I want you to check their taxes, because our taxes are now at 15.6% of GDP. 15.6% of GDP. Taxes in South Africa is 27% of GDP. Taxes in Morocco is 32% of GDP. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to answer the question because, the people of Kenya are being pushed and being told, look, you are paying more taxes than other countries. Is that true? That is not true.
Now, Mheshimiwa Rais,
we are paying the same taxes like all countries that are in our same category. And let me tell you the difference so that you can take the chance. Let me tell you the category. If we go to the market, the countries that are in LDCs, they get a lower interest rate than those of us who are in middle income. So you cannot compare them and us. We are in a different category. And for your information, countries like France, their tax as a percentage of GDP is 45%. We are only at 15.6%. That's the difference.
Well, he dwelled mostly in that specific bite on the tax to GDP ratio, mentioning what figures we're working with right here in the country, 15.6% in terms of tax to GDP rate. And he mentioned our peers in terms of middle income countries. Morocco are at 32% of GDP, just showing that the sky is the limit in one way or the other. So we're not paying more than other countries, Prof. That's clear. But even as you answer this, I'd like to understand what benefits come with the increase of tax rate to GDP. What should we expect as Kenyans? Because it seems 15.6% is what we're talking about right now. It might get to 20%, even as our peers are as high as 32%. So what should we expect as Kenyans if the tax to GDP ratio goes even higher?
This is interesting because the president is comparing, using a very good measure to compare taxes, percentage of GDP. So you can compare big and small countries and so on.
Okay.
But I think the bigger question you should be asking is whether tax rate is 15% or 45%, what do we do with that tax? I think that's the most important question. Because when you hear Kenyans complaining about tax, they are not saying they are not going to pay taxes. That's never been an issue. They know they have to pay taxes. But the question they ask is, where is that tax going? In some countries, tax rate can be as high as 50% of the GDP. But if people get services, free education, free medical services, all those other services that are provided by the government, they have no problem. And I think that's one area we need to focus on. And that's why what Kenyans are complaining about. We know the taxes are going up, but are we seeing commensurate improvement in services? So if we see commensurate improvement in services, I think the tax rate can go to 50% of the GDP. I'm not worried myself, as long as we see where that tax is going. But we should also ask a simple question. South Africa has a higher tax to GDP ratio than Kenya, but are they doing better than us? No. So the question is not the percentages, what do you do with that tax? And the other thing you would have opened up is, what type of tax is it?
Okay.
Is it VAT? Is it income tax? What type of tax is this, 15% or 45%? And finally, let's remember that tax is paid by people. So what I'm looking forward is creating more jobs. That if you have more jobs, we pay more taxes because you have more money, more income. And I think this is one area Kenyans need to keep on hammering, that you only pay taxes because you have an income. So let's start by focusing on jobs, on assets, on enterprises, because if we create that, we shall not worry about taxes. There will be so many taxpayers that actually the tax rate will go down.
Diana, briefly.
Jesse, one, I struggle whenever we say tax to GDP, debt to GDP. We are now devaluing. So you're not even sure what figure. And because we have no parameters for GDP, it just varies. But again, bottom line, if you raise 40% tax to GDP, the government will be very rich. Then you use it to pay people 3 times their salary. Stop collecting our taxes. If that's because of the continued wastage, lack of transparency, theft, and corruption, that remains the biggest problem.
Okay.
In our fiscal space. And if you want to see the problem of the amount of revenue we raise, keep looking at our budget. Every time we tell the government is advised, reduce the budget deficit, what do? They tell people raise more money. They can never cut. This is a government that just takes. A government that just takes without cutting is not a responsible government. Because until you're able to survive within your means, it means you're able to prioritize better. Ultimately, we will have huge problems. And I just want to underscore the second bit that Prof has indicated. We get taxes from income. The more you have more people making, who are employed in formal or informal sector, you have a broader tax base. You keep deepening and you're not going, in Kenya there is no wealth tax. The wealthy don't pay tax. So you're going after people who would have even tried to employ a few other people as opposed to install the best artificial intelligence. Because people with very high capital are not even the biggest employers in this country.
Okay.
The particularly small and medium enterprises are the biggest employers in this country. If you keep reducing the amount of money they can invest and employ other people, now they can't even borrow. Because to manage inflation, we have increased the interest rate. To ensure that government gets bills and bonds, the government has allowed itself to borrow at very high interest rate.
Okay.
So anybody else who would have come in to invest and employ more people is out. Moving forward, and the foundation that we have laid, he indicated that education had a huge budget bump, increment in the supplementary budget. We saw an increase in the supplementary budget to the higher education, but for loans, for help loans. It is not to support Prof to do better research on how we improve tax collection.
Okay.
It is for loans.
Okay.
So based on that, we are actually extending the period that we will have a very thin tax base of people who are permanently overtaxed. It is true we overtaxed. It is very true. Why? Because you will pay all your taxes and then you go and pay for all your essential services. That's why Kenyans are joking, please give me back my tax, take the remainder, I go and take care of myself. Others are saying, allow me, give me all my money, I'll provide myself security.
Right.
Those are the questions that the president must actively address even before we get to increasing. The tax must be accountable and transparent, and then improve incomes.
Then tell me about this, because he spoke about the fight against corruption, and that's where you said the devil is, it's always in the detail. He mentioned the greatest enabler that will make us overcome the challenge of corruption is through digitization. Plans to collect 2 billion every year through e-citizen from government services. He said this will be a great enabler. Equally, on the fight against corruption, the independence of the judiciary is sacrosanct, according to the president. And number 3, there will be no sacred cows in the fight against corruption. So looking at what the president said, is this actually being implemented? Is he doing what he says or just saying what he does? I don't know.
I agree with him on the independence of the judiciary is sacrosanct.
Yeah.
It is on paper.
But their funds, we've seen the steps the Kenya Kwanza administration has taken.
And there we must laud them for finally operationalizing the judiciary consolidated fund. They now have their own fund. The budget is still low, but that's a huge improvement.
Okay.
And for that, we laud them. But resourcing is one of it. Are there avenues to interfere? Immediately after saying the judiciary is sacrosanct, those of us who therefore share in that belief that the judiciary is sacrosanct and go to question things that we think are outside the rule of law, we have been told there is a sword.
Na si ya kukata mboga.
Si ya kukata mboga, ni ya kukata, okay, sijui kabisa. Lakini, if the judiciary is sacrosanct, we must allow everybody who is aggrieved, rightfully or wrongly, to go before that particular institution, and there is a proper adjudication.
Okay.
Now, for somebody who holds, by dint of the constitution and the responsibilities they hold, significant power. When you threaten those of us who only have power by dint of Article 1, we the people are sovereign. We only have that. I have no other oath. I have no coat of arms. I am not commander-in-chief or commander in ward administration. I am nothing else.
Okay.
That already undermines the independence of the judiciary and the reliance by Kenyans on that.
Okay.
Because some of the things that are being questioned, when you deviate in the lawmaking process from the constitutionalism, the principles of constitutionalism, that's an act of corruption. You've already influenced it to cut corners.
Okay.
The minute you divert the river of justice, it is already an act of corruption. It is not just when you steal. So that was the first contradiction. But I hope he can just come back. I'll say the interview was long, so probably he believes, allow his belief in the constitution and not the sword to take precedent.
Okay.
The second area, he indicated there are no sacred cows. There should never be sacred cows. And that is why some of us were a bit worried about the withdrawals that were done by the ODPP. And the head of the civil service, I think, is the one who has been leading the face of what the executive is fronting to be their commitment to the rule of law and ensuring that they prosecute corruption. Okay. And I have listened to him 2 times. And by the way, he's very believable. I think I actually believe him. They are very committed because, like for us, civil society, they told us, speak freely. When you see anyone stealing,
call
speak.
It out,
So please create a 911 for us to call out whenever they're stealing, because the government is committed to that particular process. But are they? Immediately thereafter, then you pause and ask those particular questions, because we've seen attempts to change the law and say, until you're fully prosecuted. There was a former principal secretary who was then appointed to become an envoy somewhere, and the questions that were being asked, why are they still in power? The explanation is that this government is different.
Okay.
There has been witch hunting.
All right.
We will only ask people to step out of office when there's there's a conviction. So you will be prosecuted while you're in power. Again, the fight against corruption relies on the rule of law and Chapter 6 on leadership and integrity.
Okay.
That means you must vacate the office to allow, and to allow that office to continue its dignity. Because when you're in that position of power, it is unlikely that we are not yet that strong in terms of our democracy and constitutionalism to allow that. So there are questions there.
Okay, well noted. Definitely giving a pat on the back where it's deserved and criticizing where it's needed as well. Prof, as we come to you, I just want to hear what the president had to say about signing labor agreements with other countries, because we've talked about taxation, we've talked about the cost of living, and now it's all about the creation of jobs. And the president has been on the receiving end when it came to, finding jobs abroad. Is he creating a conducive environment, first of all, locally, even as we seek for more opportunities for Kenyans abroad? This is what the president had to say in regards to labor agreements that have been signed with several countries.
I have signed a bilateral agreement with Saudi, UAE, with Germany, with Canada, and many other countries. We are exploring possibilities. And for your information, as a result of those, what I have been doing, between now and next month, January, the first 10,000 Kenyans will be leaving to go and work in foreign countries so that they can support themselves and support Kenya, because many countries have established a strategy on how to grow their foreign exchange earnings.
Okay, so it's all about growing the foreign exchange earnings. The president said the government secured 10,000 jobs abroad. Starting January, we'll see Kenyans flying out. But much has been said about the quality and the ability to send money home, because I think he mentioned we're targeting more money in terms of repatriations. What steps do we need to take, perhaps, to enhance the job creation locally, even as we seek to boost the numbers that are going abroad and sending money? Yeah.
When this debate of exporting jobs or exporting laborers or employees to other countries came, I did a quick check. And I found that the CEO of Google, the CEO of Microsoft, the CEO of IBM are one thing in common. They are Indians. So India has been able to export very high quality laborers to the Silicon Valley and the rest of the world. And I thought that's what we should be focusing on. High skilled jobs. So that we look for people who have done very well in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we take them to other countries in very high level jobs, and then we are going to have more income coming, more remittance coming here. So I have no problem with us exporting people to go and work in other countries, but I always ask, what type of jobs are they going to work in?
Okay.
Because it's not just a job, but you need to work in high quality job. If you go to the US, you find a lot of Mexicans and South Americans working in the US. They are seasonal workers. They go work there when the fruits are being harvested, then they go home. And quite a number of countries. And I don't think those are the jobs we are targeting. Maybe we can do that in the short run, but in the long run, we need high quality jobs, which takes us back to our country. Are we making the country conducive to create more jobs? Because most of the people in this country will never leave. They don't even have a passport. So they are looking for jobs in this country. So we need to focus on how do we create jobs? How do we make the environment very conducive so that if I want to be an entrepreneur, I can start a business and have it expand.
Okay.
And one of the ways I have debated, one of the simplest ways to create jobs in this country, and most of us ignore it, is anytime KCP results out or KCSE results out, the top kids say, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor. It's the time the top A students in KCP or KCSE said, I want to be an entrepreneur. Because one of the, creating jobs is not easy. So you need the best brains. And it's not surprising that Mark Zuckerberg, who started Meta or Facebook, was in Harvard. It's not surprising that people who started Yahoo and Facebook, and not Facebook, but Google and others, were in Stanford or top universities. So one way to create jobs is not just to say create jobs. You cannot be saying people who have failed in something else, go to your car and create jobs. It should be the best brains. So those who cannot be doctors, who cannot be engineers, before you start, you think of making people engineers, doctors, and so on, pick the entrepreneurs first. Because running Google or running Microsoft or running Yahoo or IBM or Toyota is a very complex business. So what we should be doing is, what incentives are we giving entrepreneurs in this country so that they can start our Googles, they can start our Microsoft, they can start our Toyota? Because I agree that most of the jobs in this country are in small and medium enterprises. But are they quality jobs?
Okay.
When are we going to get our Walmart? When are we going to get our big companies? So before, I agree we can export some laborers, but charity starts at home. Let's see how many jobs we can create in this country by making the place so conducive, so that entrepreneurs, investors will come and do that. What they did in China and what they have done in other countries.
That's interesting. And even as we talk about, seeking jobs abroad for Kenyans, we definitely need to sort out our immigration department, because we might secure jobs, but Kenyans can't secure the passports and necessary documents that are needed,
You know, Jess,
Yeah.
I'm surprised we are worried by things like passports. If you go to the US and you want a passport, you go to the post office and the passport is sent home to your house. So why does getting a passport become such a complex thing? It's very easy. It should be the easiest thing to get.
Well, government printers apparently break down, So.
But in the same space that you showed us here,
yes,
we talked about digitalization.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So why don't we focus on that? I like the way and let's give credit where it is due.
Okay.
The removing visa. That was a very good idea. So that we have more tourists come. And the tourists come and spend their money here. Because why should somebody spend 100 shillings to get a visa here? And he ends up not getting a visa, but he would have spent $1,000 here. But that's a debate for another day.
Interesting. And as we finalize, because our time is almost done, we can't finish without housing, because it seems to be quite close to the president's heart. He talked about it even before the interview on Sunday, mentioning that this is close to his heart. He will make sure it's rolled out. As a matter of fact, it was equally in the Azimio manifesto, just different in levies, but he's the one willing to bite the bullet and go down the rough path. Listening to what the president had to say in terms of there are people who have never seen a payslip, so let's not leave anyone behind. Briefly.
All we are saying is, let us have a country where nobody is left behind.
Maybe the question...
Because we are just thinking about ourselves. We are discussing how our salary is going to be, how 1.5% of our salary. There are people who have never seen who have never seen a pay slip. There are people who really, genuinely don't have a chance at life. I am asking the rest of Kenya, please, let us give a chance at life to many more Kenyans than those of us who are employed. We are only 3 million. We have 10 million people out there.
Well, we understand the legal proceedings on this. We can't talk extensively on the housing project, housing levy, housing tax, whichever way you put it. But Diana, it seems to be an issue where some people believe that it's not the responsibility of the employed to feel the burden of the unemployed. So that's where the divide is cutting across. Is that a populist policy? What do you make of it generally? And what the court said in terms of it being discriminatory? Yeah.
You see, the housing levy is really problematic in very many ways. And it's a good ambition that both the leading factions in the last elections had housing in mind. I really hope they had housing, not the next phase of infrastructural development where they can get some money. I really hope that was their intention, because housing is part of the socioeconomic rights that are really neglected. From health, education, water, and all of them, they are considered progressive. And governments that ultimately make progress is when they use the revenue from the consolidated fund to prioritize these particular rights because they are at the center of inequalities, of ending poverty. The president alluded himself that they are addressing education.
Yep.
All these rights are very linked. But in our African society and most other places, you do not get people out of being homeless by creating free homes. Okay? You create an environment where people can own their own homes. But let me go to the payslip and say the people with very high payslips are very few in this country. My conviction to stand up against the housing levy and how it was enacted as a tax, I still hold the position that there was never a legislative proposal that was published from the get-go as a tax. It was a saving. Kenyans said no, then we were given a final tax. That's just irregular. But there's somebody who convinced me. This is a woman who works somewhere in a school.
Okay.
And the first time that particular levy was introduced, her payslip, she has a payslip, was short of 250 shillings. She came before the head of the institution and asked, can you check my payslip? It is missing 250 shillings. That is not in my account.
Okay.
The head of the institution called and was told the 250 is the housing levy. This woman broke down. She said she does not know how she will be able to finish the rest of the month. So as you think about the people who are employed, stop thinking about 5,000, 10,000, 100,000.
Okay.
That is somebody whose payslip is 250. Can they afford a house? No. Can they get a mortgage? No. They most probably live in their parents' ancestral home or rent an informal house that has basics. But when you create a plan forcefully and extract from people in such a way, those are the effects.
Okay.
A manifesto is not law. It must be anchored on the realities of the people.
Well noted. Prof, briefly, because we had the president say roughly 6 billion is collected every year going to the housing fund. It's a lot of money. How do we approach this issue here?
I don't think anybody doubts that people in this country need housing. If you look at the slums we have, and they happen to be next to affluent estates, there's no doubt people need housing. Azimio talked about it.
True.
UDA talked about it, or Kenya Kwanza. I think what we are debating is how do we do that? So the president alluded to what Singapore did, what Malaysia did. My personal belief is that if we are going to provide housing to the public or to Kenyans, just give them incentives. For example, I was surprised to find that we have only about 30,000 mortgage accounts in this country out of 55 million. 30,000. So why are people not getting mortgages? So what the government should do is to give the private sector incentives. They will build all the houses.
Okay.
You don't even know where they'll get the fund from. But when you come and tell me you need to pay housing levy, and I'll give you a very simple example. As we talk now, I'm trying to build a house somewhere, but I'm paying housing levy. So should I go and tell the government, I'm building a house, can I get a relief out of this?
You have a salary.
So that's the problem, that we are not really looking at who really needs the house, because we know people we know who need the house, but we're not very sure what avenue we should use to provide that housing. Okay. So what I think we should do is we should use the pair of scissors. It has two braids, the private sector and the public sector.
All right.
But we are focusing too much on the public sector, building the houses for Kenyans. And if you go to one of the highest buildings in Nairobi and look up, most of the houses in this country have been built by the private sector. And what we should have done is give it more incentives. I know there are some disadvantaged members of the society who will not be able to get the price of the public sector. But those of the private sector, those are the people the government should be focusing on, not everybody.
Okay, well noted. So that's all the time we had. We couldn't exhaust each and every tenet or a point they were able to cover during the roundtable discussion, but we've generally summarized the issues that are closest to the heart of Kenyans. Cost of living, debt, distress. We weren't able to talk about the dollar and the foreign exchange reserves and the issue about everything the president said around that issue, but we were able to talk about matters to do with housing as well and matters to do with the fight against corruption. So we definitely appreciate your input. So much to talk about, so little time. That's what happens when you're having an informed discussion. Diana Gishengo, asante sana from TISA, equally joined by Prof. Exen Iraki from UN, in his capacity as an economist. Thank you so much, gentlemen and lady. That brings us to the end of tonight's edition of KTN Prime. Thank you so much for watching. Have yourself a good evening and a good start to your Tuesday. Good evening.